Management. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the introduction to the Future of Obsolescence Management. I am Laura Michael, and I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar. The presentation should last approximately 50 minutes with a 10-minute time for questions and answers. Before we begin, we want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have a question during the webinar, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these during the webinar, but if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email directly to the person who raised the question. We do capture all questions. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. This completes our housekeeping. We hope everyone is ready, and I now turn the presentation over to our hosts, Enda Ruddy and Rob Picken.
Thanks very much, Laura. So first of all, my name is Rob Picken. I'm the EMEA Director for Converge, and I'm also responsible for the FOM program in various parts of Europe. Enda Ruddy is going to take us into a little bit of information about what FOM is, what it represents, and what we hope to gain for our audience from the FOM program. And he's the Global Director of FOM and also one of our Global Directors at Converge. So I'm also going to introduce our speakers. I will introduce those right now for you. We have Willie Brown. He's going to speak for us first after Enda has given us the overview and introduction to FOM. And Willie is the Director of Sustainment Services and Support Solutions for BAE. In his past life at BAE, he has also worked on the AVCOM solution, which is part of BAE's response to obsolescent components and data services. Willie has been associated with FOM for quite a long time. He attended FOM 2016 while he was in Amsterdam, and then spoke authoritatively in FOM Los Angeles in 2017 about averting the coming disaster. Willie's based in Florida, right here in the USA. Our second speaker is a man called Jürgen Lauter, who's the CEO of a full-service EMS provider in Germany, Elektrotechnik Lauter GmbH. As a family-owned business, trust and reputation are key to having ideas and passion means his customers come to rely on his work. The company works with high-criticality industries, medical, Internet of Things, industrial, rail, and many others. Interestingly, privately, he's a keen mountaineer, so his view of risk is an entirely different scale to the rest of us. He's going to talk to us today about establishing obsolescence risk awareness in supply chains, and it's based upon a talk that he gave for us at the second FOM event in Amsterdam in 2016. Our third speaker will be Sean Neelan. He's the Director of Supply Assurance based here in Denver for Arrow Supply Assurance Division. He's part of a team that spoke at the first 3 European FOM events and at the FOM event in Los Angeles last year, and he'll be putting together vital information and contributions for our FOM event in October in Washington, D.C. this year. His key theme is around data and intelligence gaps and the risks these represent. So back to Enda to start our call today. Enda, can you explain to us what is FOM?
Okay, thanks very much, Rob. So before I explain what FOM is, I'll just explain who Converge are and then why we decided to start a movement around obsolescence and obsolescence management. So Converge very quickly. Converge has been a business for over 40 years. We've been an Arrow company since 2010, and we operate in the open market. So when it comes to obsolescence, if a component is not available direct from the supplier, it's not available through the official franchise channels, and a customer still needs it for their production, Converge's business model is to manage risk of finding those components and finding those components in the right manner in the open market. So obsolescence and sourcing obsolescence components has always been part of our business model. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we began to notice a dramatic increase in the amount of customers coming to us to help them with obsolete components. And it was a trend that we couldn't ignore. So we spoke to our sister company, Silicon Expert, who gather data on obsolescence, and they said that they were seeing a really big increase in product change notifications. And the folks at Supply Assurance were seeing something similar over at Arrow Components. So we decided we wanted to do something about it. Now, the obsolescence challenge in itself is really complex. There's a lot of challenges facing people in electronic manufacturing, but this is a particularly complex one. Moore's Law, the increase in M&As are causing the change in technology faster and faster, and there's a larger group of customers who need to support products for a long period of time. And then when you look at obsolescence, the costs for redesign have been increasing. There's software obsolescence, personnel obsolescence, there's compliance issues, government regulations. And then there's the most serious challenge that I think is in our marketplace, and that is this. Of all of the components that have been detected in North America in the last few years by GUIDEP that are counterfeit, more than half of those are obsolete. And when you think that the obsolescence market is less than 5% of the whole marketplace, you can see that the criminals who make counterfeit components deliberately target obsolete components. So it can be a very miserable and difficult challenge for our customers. So that's why we began to think about creating a movement around obsolescence.
So the context there is really interesting, Andrew. If I can recap very briefly. The problem is growing. The problem doesn't just affect traditional industries that we would think in aerospace and defense, and it's a widely applicable problem. And people are coming to all areas of the industry to try and find solutions. You mentioned, for example, Arrow's data house, Silicon Expert. You mentioned supply assurance. You mentioned Converge. So with all of those things melting into our FOM movement, what happened next?
So, we looked at the TED events, and we were really inspired by those. So I think most of the audience will know TED. It's a very well-established global community around many different topics, and it brings together thought leaders to share great ideas. And we wanted to do something similar for obsolescence. So we invited, for the first event in Amsterdam, companies from all over the supply chain, the primes, the OEMs, the EMS companies, test houses, franchises, and so on. And I must say, when it came to that first event, when we decided to host it, I was more nervous before my wedding and organize my wedding than I was for the FOM event, because we really didn't know how the industry would respond to this. For a number of years, we've been involved with the International Institute of Obsolescence Management, with the Component Obsolescence Group, but we wanted to do something to welcome the whole of EMEA and the whole of the supply chain. But as it turned out, we needn't have worried. Airbus came to speak. A member of the G19 committee from the SAE came in from America, GE Aviation, Tyler Moore from Supply Assurance, and Rob, you were one of our first speakers as well when you worked for Silicon Expert. So by the time we had our third event in Amsterdam, we had 22 different nationalities, competitors sitting shoulder to shoulder with each other, sharing best practice, sharing ideas. So what started with an idea really became a community, and it began to take off and work very well.
Yeah, I remember that first event very well, Ender. Actually, it was interesting. Coffee at first thing in the morning at 8:30. People didn't really know how much to talk about, who to sit with, where to go, what was going to happen. And you could see and sense throughout the day the trust was built. People were in a safe environment where they weren't being sold to. They were able to discuss ideas openly. And people that were actually speaking from the stage surprised us. They laid themselves bare to talk about, well, hey, we have this problem. We've got half a solution. Let's work together to find the rest of it. And that trust was built over the day. So it's a fascinating study in how we can help solve problems and come together. So with the inception of FOM and what happened next with the event, can you now answer the question for our audience, what actually is FOM?
Sure. All right. So we want FOM to be a community. So what we want is that if somebody out there is listening and they're sharing concerns about FOM, join the FOM community, where there will be events like the ones we've been talking about. There will be a series of webinars. We've built up a large library of content, of interviews, videos, white papers, presentations. And I think there's an easy example. Recently, we were contacted by a customer of ours where there was somebody in supply chain management that was worried about obsolescence around a particular government program, and their VP had challenged them to come up with a solution. So they contacted us, and now we're beginning to look at it together. And as it turns out in this case, Their concerns are not about the open market sourcing, so it won't be a converged solution. So we're going to introduce them to other people in the community, people within Arrow, people outside of Arrow, at different parts of the world, share with them some of the presentations and the knowledge that we've built up through this community, and really just make introductions so they can share their problems and share their ideas. So that's what we want FOM to become.
That's fantastic for context and for the forward-looking solution providing that we want to be able to present to users, customers, clients, consultants in the industry. You mentioned a few industry bodies there, IOM, COG, G19, DMSMS, and Willie will talk about these in more detail, or a couple of these in more detail in just a few moments. But with all of these communities around, with all of these thought leadership aspects that are coming in, and of course, against the context of the increasing problems of obsolescence, as a final point, Ender, before we move to our speakers, what do we wish for our FOM community members?
All right. I'm going to quote Tyler Moore. We were on stage with him at a recent event, and Tyler Moore works at Arrow Supply Assurance, and he talks about the misery of the challenge of obsolescence and how much risk it is and how misery loves company. So what we'd really like FOM to become is somewhere where people who are faced with this challenge can meet other like-minded people and together come up with solutions, come up with ideas, and maybe move the needle from misery towards happiness. That's it, Rob.
No, fantastic, Ender. So thank you very much for the overview of FOM and where we're coming from, and hopefully where we're all going together. Now, I introduced Willie at the top of the call. So before we move into your slides, Willie, and have a look at what you're going to present to us today, can you talk to us very briefly about your advocacy of collaboration? It's been a theme in every time that we've discussed anything with you at FOM. It was a theme that ran through your slides and your talk very strongly last year in Los Angeles. And you don't just talk about this, you embody it. You're involved in a huge number of industry team efforts, especially through DMSMS and the Future USA IIOM, the International Institute of Obsolescence Management chapter. Can you tell us about the importance of collaboration and your efforts with these organizations, please?
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I've been heavily involved with several of the Defense Standardization Program Office organizations such as GIDEP, where I'm currently serving as the Vice Chair for the Industry Advisory Group, as well as working with the Part Standardization Committee, as well as the DoD DMS Working Group that's also working on the conference. And I've been involved with COG, or the predecessor for IOM, probably for the last 12, 13 years. And what I've learned from those organizations is, no one company, no one organization has all the answers. And a lot of times the answer to a solution has already been found or identified somewhere in the community. So it really is to everyone's advantage to basically take advantage of the resources and the networks that's out there to help better serve your customer and better serve your company. So as they say, it takes a village. It definitely takes a team with obsolescence management. So I believe in it, committed to it, and I think that will come through in the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you for that overview, Willie. So let's kick off into your slides now, and we'll ask you a few more questions following those as well. So, Willie, over to you.
Okay. So the title for my presentation last year at Los Angeles FOM was Averting the Coming Disaster. And really what I meant by that was the fact that there have been so many mergers and acquisitions over the last few years that with those acquisitions, I think it was presented on the slide before about the rationalization of product lines. That is one of the first things that happens when there's a merger and acquisition. One of the surprising things that we were seeing, though, is even with the increase in the acquisitions, we were not seeing a heavy increase in the part discontinuance notifications. Actually, we saw a drop in them, but that was basically a red herring, because in the following years we have seen that increase, and that increase will continue. I think on the slide it was showing 2017 through 2020, and I think those dates are pretty correct. So really the coming disaster is there will be a huge increase in obsolescence notifications and parts just going away out of the supply chain. But that being said, one of the slides that I had was really it behooves you to know your data, to know your system, to know what's actually loaded within your configurations. Because part of the problem is you can do an obsolescence assessment, and in most cases, we work on some really old systems. So in most cases, when we do that initial assessment, we have a high level of obsolescence. But depending upon the data that you have, depending upon your roadmap for your product, a lot of the times you really don't have nearly as much of an impact from obsolescence as it was first seen. So the point of this slide is really to drive you to the fact that you really need to focus your efforts, because you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources pursuing items that are supposedly obsolete, but they will never have an impact on your system. The reason being is a lot of those parts never fail, so you never have to reorder those parts. And then also, a lot of those have what we call a logistic solution, meaning that you have more than enough of the item in stock for your current and projected demand rate to meet whatever level of product sustainment that you need. So really the takeaway from this slide is the more data you have, the better quality of the data, the higher fidelity your analysis will be, and the less funding and resources you will spend on resolving obsolescence issues. And it will allow you to focus on the ones that are truly going to have an impact on your system. Next slide. So on this slide, this is the one where I'm talking about the fact that you really need a team to be successful. When we first started this business 20 plus years ago, obsolescence existed, but it was not well known. The impacts usually were pretty well handled because you could find other sources of supply fairly easily just using your procurement department. And I think a lot of companies, especially the larger companies, still kind of operate on that same fallacy, that just using the procurement department, they can resolve most of the obsolescence issues. Well, what we're finding is a lot of times in those systems, they have not been in contact with the suppliers. If they made a purchase, they did the product line run, and now they're coming back several years later to try to procure more parts for expanding the life cycle or doing a mod on the system, and they're finding out that they have obsolescence at that point. And that is the typical model for companies and organizations that just purely depend on their procurement department to basically handle the parts and handle any of the procurement issues that they have. What we have seen and what we have found to be really successful for us is to move towards more of a team effort. I know we had a system that was a 90% COTS. And the thing that we did with that system was we, and the customer, to their credit, realized that they had a problem. They had lost, they had lost their connection to their supply chain. And so they realized that they needed to do a little bit more than just going out and trying to procure the parts, because that was not going to work. So we worked with them to put together a plan to actually go out and visit the different suppliers, to inform them what we were trying to do with the obsolescence plan, and really to create a win-win situation where we were creating a team effort. Because the reality of obsolescence management is every supplier has a supplier. And so the obsolescence flows down the chain, and it flows up the chain. So the more you can get your full supply chain involved with your obsolescence management plan, as well as any other data suppliers or partners that you have, the more robust and the more efficient your obsolescence program will be. Next slide. So, in conclusion, there is a coming disaster, potentially, if you don't take actions. Most of the actions are pretty simple to do, but they will take time, especially when you're trying to develop this team. And it is a real learning curve. I know when we were going out to some of the suppliers asking for the bills of materials, the first answer was no, which is what is to be expected, because if someone came to us, we would give the same answer. But as we had an opportunity to educate them on what we were trying to do, show the benefit, it was easy to establish a win-win relationship with the team. And as I said before, owning your data is critical, and the quality of your data is critical. A lot of obsolescence has been solved by just correcting part numbers, by correcting manufacturers and cage code. So a lot of times, just the quality of the data or lack of quality of the data drives a lot of what they call part chasing, just running around, spinning your wheel on things that really will not ever have an impact on your system. But a lot of resources are being wasted there. So it's very critical to ensure you have quality data. One of the things I didn't talk about in the short slide deck here was automation. We've seen that as a huge driver in efficiencies within the program and also cost savings. So the more you can automate your process, the more you can take out any of the manual efforts, the better your system will be, and the more your customers will be appreciative of the quick response you're able to provide, and the ability to be flexible with some of the requirements that they may have that may be sort of out of the norm, but you have the capability to address those. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the fact that you really do need to develop a strong supplier base, supplier relationship. That is probably the biggest issue we've seen with managing and averting a lot of obsolescence issues. Communication. It is to your benefit to ensure that you stay in contact with your suppliers, especially of those critical devices. And I know it's expensive to develop second sources, but that is also to your benefit to identify who may be an additional source, that if the case ever comes, you already know where to go, or in some cases, actually sources of repair for some items. So building that relationship, building that team is going to be critical in the coming years. And I think that's the end of my slides.
Willie, that's a great overview, and well done for condensing a very rich talk that you delivered for us some time ago into just a short 10 or 15-minute overview. I do have some questions for you to share with the audience. One of the things that you mentioned is trends, for example. You noticed a while ago a fairly interesting drop in PCN against all predictions, followed by a sharp increase. And you also mentioned that when you started the industry 20-plus years ago, that the impact and sources of problems were very, very different. But also the response to those problems was to push it all through procurement. And you also mentioned that larger organizations still do try to work this way. So with your experience in BAE on the hardware side and in AVCOM on the software side, what trends are you seeing in the last few years that are having an impact on obsolescence management more widely?
The trend that I will say that's probably having the most impact really is not a technical one. It is more of regulations. Serving on the various industry government committees, one of the things that they have been working on for several years is trying to ensure that there is contractual language in contracts in regards to obsolescence management. So what we've seen over the last few years is an increase in the number of companies, small, large, even internal to BAE, where they're in their new contracts, obsolescence management and the need to have an obsolescence management plan has been written into those. So we see that as being one of the biggest trends that is happening, and that will continue in the future. And most likely it will become a little bit more specific in what the requirements are. So that is really the biggest trend. Yeah, the fact that where obsolescence was in the past versus where it's going now, yeah, that's kind of been part of the evolution of the field. But really, I think the trend that's going to have the greatest impact is the flow down from the government for obsolescence management.
Perfect. So with that in mind, Willie, a follow-on question there is, you're seeing an increase in contracts having obsolescence written in, regulatory compliance necessity coming from the government, and it's impacting large companies and small companies. As this develops, what do you anticipate for the future?
For the future, what I will see is a continuation of that trend. But what's really going to happen is, and I'm sitting in some of the committees where they're doing it now, they are refining what it means to have an obsolescence management plan. Because currently it's kind of vague. So you can pretty much say you can claim anything to be an obsolescence management plan. But what they're doing now is trying to flow down more of the best practices of what constitutes a true and meaningful obsolescence management plan. So not only is it being put into the contracts, but also the level of detail and the requirements for what constitutes a qualified or obsolescence program that will meet the requirements is one of the issues that I see. That's really still going to have a pretty significant impact, and it's going to drive a lot of activity within the field.
No, thank you, Willie. And as a short final question to build on a couple of points you've just made in both your answers to the questions and in your presentation. Admission of problems is a key point, and also planning and collaboration up and down the supply chain is key. So as a final question for you, before we wrap briefly and move to Jürgen, what's the one piece of advice you would give to those in a role that carries responsibility for obsolescence management?
The best advice I can give anyone who has been in obsolescence management or is new to it is to find out what are the different organizations that are out there, what are the different resources that are available. Because you can spend a lot of time trying to solve a problem that's already been solved. So don't spend your time trying to reinvent the wheel. Basically identify what are the different committees that are out there, what are the best practices and standards that exist, and then start to develop your network. Because a lot of times the solution to a problem that you've been banging your head against the wall may be just a phone call or email away. So develop your network, become a student of the craft, so to speak, and really learn what's out there and what's available and what the best practices are so that you can provide excellent service to your customers.
That's great, Willie. Thank you very much for your insights.
Yep.
So we're going to move over into Europe at this stage to Jürgen Lauter from Elektrotechnik Lauter, ETL, over in Germany. I introduced Jürgen at the top of the call, but Jürgen, before we move into your slides, in your own words, can you tell us a little bit about your company and your experience with obsolescence?
Sure. We are a family-owned EMS service provider with around 170 employees. and a sales volume of 40 million euro in 2017. Our customers are widely spread over the industry, but mainly located in industrial automation, medical, IoT, sensors, and embedded. Our special focus is high mixed low volume with lot sizes from 1 to 10,000 pieces, but in practical it's an average of 250. And it's mainly complex electronic boards which we assemble. We serve the complete electronic life cycle from development to the after-sales services. And we are dedicated to the service and flexibility to our customers. We are offering some special services in production which are not usual in the industry, like, for example, ruggedizing boards for harsh conditions, soldering under vacuum, and special coating services. We serve a very broad range of technology and products for various industries, which makes for us the obsolescence management highly challenging because it's so diverted and we have so much different products. So it's a challenge for us to focus on the real problems.
Thank you, Jürgen. So with that in mind, I'd like to move into your slides. This is, of course, a condensed version of the slide deck that you presented for us at FOM in Amsterdam in 2016, and it deals with interpretation and awareness of risk. So let's move on to your first slide, and I'll turn over to you to talk us through your deck.
Yes, thank you. I have to thank you not only to be introduced as entrepreneur, but in my free time I'm also a mountaineer, as I don't live far from the Alps. So you now will surely be surprised about the image, which does not have anything to do with obsolescence at the first view, but I want to show you what we can learn from other disciplines for our situation. Not only in mountaineering, but also in aviation industries and other critical industries, I think it's really essential to reduce risk to an absolute minimum to avoid dangers for lives. And if we watch that picture, what do you see? Do you see a risky situation? In my point of view, I see obviously a relaxed backcountry skier walking on the top of steep ridges, which is certain risk of falling down the steep slopes and avalanche risk further down. But I can tell you, when I made this tour with a friend together, we had a relaxed and really beautiful day. And the question is, what feeling would you have in the same situation? Panic, relaxedness? I would assume if you are not trained and educated that at least some of you would feel something like panic. So the question is, and regarding the risks, how can it be that two persons in the objectively same situation are feeling comfortable and others are in panic mode? So how can this be explained? Next slide, please. So I think mountaineering, you can take other disciplines as well, of course, but as I'm a mountaineer, I know that education and even more experience made by yourself, or the better way is to get the experience from other people, so you don't have to make your own bad experience on your own. And there are some group dynamic processes which are not easily influenced, cannot easily be influenced by you yourself, and the mentality of the person. And all those factors lead to a subjective view of risk awareness. So what I was thinking about when I visited the first FOM, for me, the question was, how can we bring the people in that community to a, let me say, similar subjective view of the risk awareness? So for me, it was clear we have to share experience and we have to educate the people. Next slide, please. The problem was, when I was thinking about that, as an EMS service provider, and that was exactly what I was experiencing all over the years, you are somewhere in between the suppliers, manufacturers on the one side, and then the customers and OEM on the other side. So whatever problem occurs in this process or supplier channels, it will end up at the DMS branch to solve the problem, or at least you are involved in the problem, if you are responsible for that or not. So in the end, it doesn't matter if you have a quality problem, if you have unplanned redesign or rising costs. In the end, the customer will blame you that it doesn't work. So, and even more of that, if we're going to the next slide, if we are thinking about the processes or the involved persons in a supply chain, the complete process begins in the engineering over the sales and planning to the purchasing department, over the production and to the after-sales services in the end. But the problem in our situation is, if the question is which part of that process is your customer using, and then you have to be clear whose responsibility is in which process. For example, engineering can be done at a full service provider, of course, side, or at the customer side. So in some projects, we are in a situation that we get a project where we were not involved in the engineering. So then you have to live with that situation, but then it's clear that the engineering part was the responsibility of your customer, but that's not always clear. So for me, it's really important to talk to your customers and make clear what responsibility has every single partner in the channel or in the process of electronics production. And so that you can avoid, in the end, discussions, I thought you would do it, and the other guy said you should do it. And so what we did is we started something like trainings with our customers, and we were talking about the reasons of obsolescence, and we were talking about the problems and the risk we have and how we can control it. In the next slide, and that's often a point where everybody gets big eyes. If you are considering how far the organization, EMS and customers together, I often see that our customers are just in the beginning and they react on obsolescence problems. So for me, it was always the last 20 years I experienced obsolescence issues often as a problem and avoidable escalations. So I was forced pretty early to put a focus on that. So what is the goal? The goal is just to move everybody from the reactive obsolescence management at least up to the proactive obsolescence management, and even better to the strategic obsolescence management. So what is the difference between those three steps? We will see that on the next slide. I think almost everybody knows something about last time buy, storage, long time storage, second source validation, redesigns, and reverse engineering. And that was exactly what I had all the years, unpredictable, avoidable escalation. So the question is how can your customer and you together drive in the direction of a proactive obsolescence management? So there are some tools which are very, very, very experienced and good meanwhile, which means BOM monitoring. You mentioned Silicon Experts, which is an excellent tool to monitor your BOM. The databases, as Willy said, is very important for that. So you can use those tools. You can do with those tools also life cycle risk estimation. Of course, your ERP research, your ERP data should be very good and consistent to have the right decisions. And you can also do a FMEA, and as I said, the external databases are crucial in that proactive obsolescence management. Going to strategic obsolescence management, I have to say it's not always all of the tools that you see are the right thing for the right order for the right product. But of course, some of those parts are really important. It's a dedicated organization, which is absolutely crucial. Willie said that interdisciplinarity is of the essence. Supplier management, global market surveillance, who is emerging, what will happen on the market, and also the contract management, as Willie introduced, will be one of the points which will have a much more importance than it used to be. Then the personnel and technology management, which is often forgotten. You can produce the part, but you can't test it because the test equipment is so old that you can't use it anymore. And of course, the plant redesign. That's roughly speaking the steps where the different steps and professionality of obsolescence management can be divided. So in the end, I have to say, in the last slide, what was the outcome when I talked to our customers, and we made some education training programs, 1 or 2 days with our customers, and one of the CEOs of one of our customers said, "Thank you for the workshop," or better to say, for consulting us. It was very valuable for us. So in the end, we are all a multiplier of FOM. So what are you all are willing to share the knowledge and to share the experience that you made? That's from my side.
Jürgen, that's an excellent overview, and I remember very fondly your presentation at FOM EMEA, and you've done very well to condense it into so few slides in a short time. I have a couple of follow-on questions for you after that deck, though, and I'd like to put them to you. One of them, you spent a whole slide talking about collaboration across your internal organization within functions and departments. And of course, Willie and you have both talked about external collaboration throughout your supply chain. In real life, quite often the biggest barriers to our success are internal. That internal communication is very, very difficult. How do you see this actually working in real life, and how are your customers responding to these suggestions that you make?
Unfortunately, most of the customers are understanding the problem and are understanding the training and agree on that. But at the point when it comes to the situation that they have to set up a real interdisciplinary group which is able to decide quick and smart which actions are appropriate, I have to say in real it's really hard, and we often in the MS branch are something like a project manager who is informing the people on the customer side and bringing them together. Most of the organizations are still organized in that way, that they don't need as a dedicated obsolescence team and act solely in their function. As Willie said, for example, it's all about purchasing department. But this alone leads often to suboptimal results and long decision processes through a lack of information. That's not good. But in the end, the good news is that there is a growing awareness that the goal is to avoid problems and not to react on them. And this is only possible in acting as a dedicated team.
No, I agree. I think it's the dedication and commitment, Jürgen, that you pull up to making things better that needs to be owned by everybody in your internal supply chain, your internal decision-making tree. I have one more question for you before we turn over to Sean. Personally, what would you like to see more of in our industry for the future of obsolescence management?
That's exactly what FOM is trying to do, to have a growing awareness in of the involved parties in obsolescence problems and in the obsolescence thing. I personally would like to have a more active role of the regular distribution to extend life cycles through stock services and financing services. More interdisciplinary teams, getting things done faster and more effective, involving all the departments, and most important, Here is also the involvement of sales, which is often forgotten, like, oh, we have to have some repair kits or something like that. That's often forget. From the manufacturer side, a different view on obsolescence, price versus length of life cycle. I'm convinced that customer would pay more for some parts if they knew they are really long time available. Maybe just a suggestion from my side, the price has to adjust to the life cycle of the product. That could be a solution.
That's great, Jürgen, and I know it's getting late in Europe, so thank you very much for your input there. I'm going to turn over to the final one of our three speakers who is in the room with us, Sean Nealon, Director of Supply Assurance for Arrow here in Denver. So Sean, thanks for joining us. In your role, you work at a franchise for Arrow, yet you and the teams that you interact with on a daily basis work both with suppliers and with customers. It's quite a rare position to be in. It's usually a split of responsibilities, either you're supplier-focused or you're customer-focused. Can you share what you gain from this perspective and the benefits it brings to your customers?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So, at Arrow, we exist in a unique crossroads between customers, technology, and original component manufacturers. So we see the best-case scenarios and, unfortunately, sometimes the worst-case scenarios played out on a daily basis. We see best practices, and we learn the personalities of both of our customers and our suppliers to help us anticipate upcoming events and try to navigate customers to a positive resolution of any obsolescence activity.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So with that in mind, where Arrow stands between customers, suppliers, technology, and developments and software, let's get into your slides. So please take it away.
Yeah, sure. We have talked previously in the webinar about the wave of semiconductor mergers and acquisitions. Here I have it encapsulated over a short timeline. You can see that from 2015 to 2017, we saw a major inflection point in M&A activity on the semiconductor side. Ironically, 2017 only recorded $28 billion, a great deal of relief for most of us in the industry. However, if you look at years previous to 2015, that dwarfs previous acquisitions. We don't expect it to be done this year. You can see that we have 2018 plus a couple of major acquisitions, one waiting approval, one that has completed, being Microchip and Microsemi. And we expect this trend to continue to a point. And as Willie alluded to, there is product line rationalization that happens shortly after this event of merger and acquisition takes place. However, I don't want people to be mistaken that it is a one-time event. It is rather an iterative way that they continually reevaluate that portfolio. Go ahead to the next slide. Another interesting element is the fab capacity and the concentration therein. As we get to lower nodes and the expense of building a fab and running a fab gets beyond the financial capabilities of most manufacturers, there may come a time in the future where the original component manufacturer is not the deciding force of whether a product will be obsoleted or not. So there are people engaging with suppliers daily basis at most of our customers. But on the back end, our manufacturers, suppliers, is often opaque to end customers for us. And another extremely important data point is really who's in the boat with you. There might be 10 customers on a part, but one of them might be driving north of 80% of the business. Arrow has view of that for the business we conduct on a worldwide basis, but direct customers and other channel partners are not necessarily visible to us. So all of a sudden, on the left, you see a team of people all working. Everyone's getting a great price. Production is running well. And on the right, everyone's jumped out of the boat but that poor guy. Now, he's taking on water, and he faces either an obsolescence or a pricing event that will be probably very uncomfortable for his company to absorb. And depending on the vertical, the end application of that customer, they might not have an ability to redesign that product, and hopefully that guy knows how to swim well. Okay? So when we talk about knowing your blind spots internally, there are multiple variations of what you see in front of you. And this is something that no one can do for a customer from the outside in without full transparency. You know, figure out what is the risk class that you face at the device level. How important is this product for your company? How likely is it going to be obsoleted? And how well communicated do you anticipate that change to be? That will help you establish priorities and to look at those devices that will have possibly enterprise-level effects on your company and your ability to conduct business in a profitable manner. So Arrow will help you as much as possible to understand your blind spots, but you internally will have to evaluate what is the most important critical enterprise-level risk that you face, and then seek to engage with FOM, with Arrow, with the Silicon Experts team to help understand how to best mitigate and avoid those type of problems. The cost of redesign is only increasing. Aerospace, defense, heavy industrial, medical, all of those are what leap to mind when it comes to redesign, requalification, recertification with costs running into the tens of millions of dollars. We have noticed over time, though, that even light industrial and some commercial applications, customers do not want to dedicate the resources to that redesign. Unfortunately, activity at each individual actor upon the supply chain biases individual entities to have minimum financial commitments to inventory. From our perspective and from an enterprise level, it is always cheaper to have a couple more than you need than to have not enough when the time comes that you need those parts. That's it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. I think the perspective there is incredibly interesting when we start to look at other aspects. You mentioned, for example, the story of grounded Navy fighters that we have here, and of course, buying too many components and having to store them for a long time is way cheaper given the disproportionate risk of buying too few. And that's all down to perspective. So building very nicely on from Jürgen's talk as well, it's the perspective that you have. And with regard to costs mentioned many times, risk mentioned many times, corporate compliance mentioned many times, and regulatory issues coming up. With the risk scoring that you demonstrate today on the previous slide, is that something you're actively using with your customers to narrow down their focus?
You know, we try to give a best practice evaluation to our customers and their bills of materials. Again, for us to tell them is backwards. They need to first identify internally those devices that go into certain products that are flagship, that are non-negotiable, have to be produced. The risk scoring that they would use would be different by every company. I will refer individuals looking for a place to start. You know, ISO 31000 and ISO 31010. The first talks about risk management, the principles and the guidelines, while the second is more related to risk assessment techniques. The standard frequently refers to pharma, for example, but it's really ubiquitous across industry. What is important? When do you need to make that evaluation, and how often do you need to check that? Arrow perceives risk differently at an enterprise level, but at an individual customer level, please understand we want our customers to be happy with product, and will help them understand via the suite of tools and the industry consortiums that we are part of about how to best avoid those incidents.
I think that's it. One of the things you did mention about avoidance, for example, is that mergers and acquisitions, even though they're a process that are going through right now, it's not a one-time event. But when the merger happens, when the acquisition happens, there's so many variables on technology development, on fab investment, on customer focus, on segmentation, and on future further acquisitions, that it's a process and a learning curve. So having something that's a risk scoring metric that relies upon internal interpretation is incredibly important. So the risks that you outline and the way you help customers to classify those, is that something that's available to Arrow's customers and partners, both upstream and downstream in the supply chain right now?
It most certainly is. We have multiple ways for you to engage with Arrow to help mitigate, avoid your risk, from multiple design on the device level at the beginning through our production engagement with the core of Arrow Supply Assurance, and our partners at Converge, our partners at Silicon Expert that can help you do the FOM monitoring. The entire Arrow team is oriented around giving you a comprehensive solution that covers the full life cycle of the product, including when you're ready to return that, recycle, or dispose of that product. We are a sunrise to sunset electronics organization and are oriented as such. Ideally, we want you to be wildly successful customers who keep coming back based on the service and the products that we provide you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. So we've come to the end of the structured part of the conversation today. We will shortly be looking at the questions raised by the people on the call and the contributors and attendees. But to give our speakers some time to form correct answers and complete answers to the questions that you have raised on the call, we'll talk very briefly about the FOM collection and the FOM event that's coming up now as well. Shortly, we're going to be able to open up to our community of members, of guests, of speakers, of collaborators, information on our FOM collection, which, as Enda mentioned at the top of the call, includes videos, web seminars, interviews, white papers, and key topics for study and interpretation through our website. You can see at the bottom of this slide, converge.com/FOM-collection will be your source for that. After a short sign-up process, you'll be able to access the detail and the data and all of the videos and information that you can possibly need about FOM from our history through the website. However, this collection is continually growing. This year, we're holding a large FOM event in Washington, D.C., the U.S. nation's capital, on October the 10th and October the 11th. The 11th will be a conference with multiple speakers across industry verticals and disciplines, covering both supply chain security and data intelligence. That's preceded on October the 10th with an afternoon workshop to enable significant interaction from attendees and industry experts to make significant progress on key questions and key problems coming up for the future. To register for this event, please visit the website that's shown on the slide on your screen right now, converge.com/FOM2018-Americas. We'd be delighted also to answer any further questions that you have about this event after the conference today. So now that our speakers have had some time to digest their questions, Jürgen, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like to build on some things that both Willie and Sean have mentioned. You have a unique perspective on this call because you're based in Europe and you're in EMS. Therefore, you interact significantly with companies both large and small and on supply and the consumption side. Willie mentioned specifically regulatory compliance and the effect of contract commitments on U.S. companies. What are you seeing in Europe that's affecting obsolescence management from this perspective?
Well, on the one hand, I see in Europe that more and more companies use those professional tools of obsolescence management, especially in the EMS business. On the other hand, often customers do it not that deep way than most of the professional EMS companies do. But I can tell you, it can be a really game changer to win projects if you can explain your customers how you can avoid future obsolescence problems and guarantee contractual long-term available through professional methods. Because what is different in Europe and especially in Germany, Germany is famous for his mid-sized European industry, hidden champions, small mid-sized companies. So those companies have a highly diversified products, and those products are in critical areas. So the life cycles of industrial, medical, and other products are much higher than for the consumer products, which are mainly produced in Asia. A usual product we produce has at least 10 to 15 years life cycle, some up to 30 years. Nothing, if you compare it to aviation, where I had in the first FOM, it's up to 60 years. I was really surprised about that. But I see, as I said, you can it could be really a game changer if you can sign something contractual and your commitment to a professional obsolescence management.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Jürgen. I'd like to move to another question from one of our contributors online as well. Sean, this one's really to you. It's as demand from commercial industries like cell phones, electric cars, for example, increase for more mundane parts such as capacitors. How do you see this impacting us from an obsolescence standpoint? And the question goes on. For example, we're seeing shortages right now with long lead times and end-of-life notices from LCCs. Are consumers increasingly classifying components as unavailable and not really seeing a line between obsolescence and shortage because they both are affected in the same?
That's an excellent point, Rob. So, my first response to that is the more folks that are in the boat on a particular device, the more likely the manufacturer, the original component manufacturer, will continue to make them. Your secondary point about if the demand of that outstrips the supply to such a degree that it might as well be obsolete for all your ability to procure it at that time is very valid. And we are seeing a lot of over-demand on the system right now. And that, again, goes back to avoidance or mitigation on end-of-life decisions or inability to get devices. The design level at the beginning, of course, multi-sourcing is one way that customers are able to get around that. And then also having a secure supply chain set up through partners will best enable you to ride the wave of product availability.
Thank you. So I think from that point, it's really back to perspective again, which is something that both you and Jürgen have discussed in good detail. Willie, let's come back to you for a moment. We sent you a question over from one of our international users on the call. Can you elaborate on what type of automation tools are on the market and how they can actually be employed in the use cases that you see?
Well, when I was giving the presentation last year, the slides I had in there on automation were really more focused towards your internal organization and your internal processes. I'm really not aware of any automation tools, products that are available. The closest thing I could think of, and it probably is not applicable to our international non-U.S. audience, is becoming a GuideApp member. Because of GuideApp, they offer several abilities for users to submit a bill of materials and get a listing of any kind of alerts that have gone out on that, or several other types of analysis that they can do. But as far as commercially available automation, really not aware of any. The focus was really more on the same thing of developing a team, working with your IT group for any kind of reports that you do on an ongoing basis, different types of queries or analysis that you do. Basically, it was in regards to your internal processes and automating those as much as possible.
No, perfect, Willie. So maybe that's a niche in the market that one of our FOM attendees or a group of cross-industry FOM attendees will fill for us in the future. I know that we're slightly over time, but I do want to pose a final question open to all three of our speakers today before I close and wrap the call today. We'll start in reverse order, and it's the same question for everybody. Sean, what do you hope for in the future of obsolescence management?
Well, from Aero perspective, we hope that everyone has this nailed perfectly and there's no problems. But absent that miracle, we really encourage our customers to take advantage of last-time buy opportunities afforded to them by the manufacturers. We clearly understand the knock-on effects and downstream effects of decisions made at that point and their ability to make that product. to engage with a suite of tools, both from Aero and the broader industry and communities such as FOM, so that best practices can be shared. That's what we hope happens to the organization.
Fantastic. And the same question to you, Jürgen, with your perspective from Europe. What do you hope for the future of obsolescence management?
From the EMS perspective, I would like that we are involved in a very, very early stage of the product development to avoid obsolescence at all. So often we are involved when we have already the mess. So this should happen to a really early stadium. So and the second thing is that the sales people they should know very well the things about obsolescence management, and then they should try to plan the life cycle of a product and to plan how long this will be produced and in which numbers. From the supplier side, I would expect that the distribution industry is more supporting the EMS industry and their customers with stocking components and extending the life cycles. And from the broker side, it's pretty clear that they have to avoid any counterfeit risks and do a professional way of stocking their components.
Thanks, Jürgen. I think it's refreshing to have the view from someone in an EMS who is bang in the middle of the supply chain and sees the worst and the best of all possible worlds. So thank you for that. Willie, I'll finish with you before I again wrap the call. What do you hope for in the future of obsolescence management?
Probably the thing I'm looking forward to the most is the recognition of the profession, and that we will be able to establish career paths for practitioners and technical certifications so that it's in line with other engineering disciplines, and that people who come into it will see that there is a pathway to increasing their professional recognition and certification. And along with that, just like the problems that we've seen have evolved, that the actual profession needs to continue to evolve because it is becoming a growing need and issue within the industry. And so just to see the professionalism and it to be recognized as such is something I'm really looking forward to.
Thanks, Willie. Thank you. So I know we answered very few questions at the end of the call today, but we needed to give plenty of time for our speakers to give comprehensive, clear answers. We did receive many, many questions through the chat window, and for those who submitted questions, thank you very much for that. As Laura mentioned at the top of the call today, we will individually get back to everyone who asked a question with a full and complete answer further down the line. One last point from me on the questions and answers. Future web seminars will be held in August and September. The web seminar in August will include our sister company, Silicon Expert, and look specifically at data and information analysis. Silicon Expert, for example, has been mentioned a few times by a couple of our speakers today. So it remains for me to say thank you to all of our attendees and especially to our speakers today. I hope that you found this useful and informative as an introduction to the future of obsolescence management, and I'd very much like to see and hear all of you on future calls with us as well. If you would like to attend our obsolescence event in Washington, D.C. in October, please get in touch with us by any of the means that are on your screen right now. If you're in touch with any of our Converge team members, or in fact any of your Arrow team members on a regular basis, they will also have information on any of the web seminars, access to the FOM community data portal, and also on attendance of the FOM event in October. Thank you very much for your patience and for your time. We've enjoyed the call today, and let's write the future of obsolescence management together. Thank you.